Welcome one, welcome all to the politics of cinema. On this show, we believe films are never neutral. There's a political as well as an artistic message captured in every film, in every country, in every time period, and we're on the lookout for all of it. My name is Aaron Spears.
And my name is Isaac Miller. And on this episode, we are starting our October Halloween coverage with a theme of bad trips. We're specifically looking at Blue Sunshine from 1977 and Mandy from 2018. I had to screw up something.
Well, it's set in the 1980s. I don't know if that's what was on your brain.
It is set in the 1980s, in a mythical 1980s. Traditionally, or the last few years, when we have Halloween, when we come to October, everything we do is horror-oriented. And in previous years, we had a centralized theme that went throughout the whole month.
Right.
Art, horror movies, Romero films that people don't normally watch, that sort of thing. But this year, we're breaking it up. We're just going to have a couple themed episodes. And the first one is on basically movies about bad drug trips. And with a sort of sub-theme in this case, which not unconnected of Aftershock of the 60s to a certain degree, which is kind of a favorite theme of this podcast, frankly. It's a very interesting subject.
Which is interesting because neither one of us were around for the 60s. I was born in the late 70s, which obviously I don't remember any of the 70s then. And you were born in the 80s. So
the late 80s, yeah.
Ladies, so it's interesting that these movies. Well, I think we're both big New Hollywood fans, but also it's an interesting political time that I don't think we've experienced that level of politics in film in our lifetime going to the movies. I may be wrong about that, but I feel like it's such an interesting and potentially confusing time period of just trying to throw anything they could at the wall or at the screen in this case and see what would stick and what audiences go for in the 60s and 70s.
You can go back to our first episode, all the way back covering Children of Men, where, I think that is actually the observation, which is this is the period in which social movements are, if anything, most embedded in film.
Yeah.
Certainly in American case, but I think globally as well. You have to be careful generalizing, but I think so. And so it's a particularly interesting period. We've gone through a period of major social unrest and protests globally since 2008, really 2010 and 11. There's just been multiple cycles of it. And that certainly appeared in film. You can feel its reverberations, but much more muffled. And partially because of the sort of lack of clarity within the politics of those movements, but also because of the structure of the film industry and the impact of them.
That's mainly what I was going to say. Yeah, the way it's structured, because we're now into like franchise territory and just these massive, tentpole 100 million plus financed ones. You don't get the little like couple $1 million movie the way you could get in the 60s and 70s.
Well, but we still have plenty of indie movies.
No, I'm not saying we don't, but like when the most amount of financing in Hollywood is going towards, franchise IP, you're not getting much experimentation going on or funded the way that you were in the late 60s and the early 70s with like the American, like New Hollywood era.
Yeah. But what I mean though is that even if you look at indie films, a large portion of them don't take advantage of that moment.
Being indie.
I think, yeah, well, but they don't actually, there was a cycle of post-Occupy movies to a certain degree. And there's definitely, we felt the reverberations of BLM through representation,
sure,
and to a certain degree some movement stuff, but very little that actually looks at the movements as their real subject matter. It's just not there.
Oh, I see. Yeah. You're gonna have to like read through the subtext and be like, oh, that's what that might be really about.
With Judas and the Black Messiah being interesting, but yeah, it's like subtextual or it's allegorical or it's like a version, but not it. And I think that says a lot about the depoliticization that had existed before, and to a certain degree, I think, frankly, to a certain degree, very sophisticated movies at a lot of levels, but lack of political sophistication. Obviously, Sorry to Bother You is a totally different matter. But a lack of integration with actual movement work in terms of filmmaking. I think it speaks to the way these movements affect the culture.
Yeah, for sure.
And it may have something to do with the structure of indie movie making that I don't realize. But yeah, I mean, obviously it doesn't, you don't have an Attica moment, right? Like in Dog Day Afternoon, and Dog Day Afternoon
Right.
being like a headline movie, I guess. I don't know how big it was supposed to be, but like, you've got the biggest star, one of the biggest male stars in Hollywood headlining this with a good director. We don't have
Yeah.
that now. And I think you're totally right. But even in the spaces they have, I'm just going to be mean about it. I don't think they use it well.
No, I'm with you there. I mean, obviously we can find exceptions, but generally speaking, like, so I always thought this was interesting since we're pairing Blue Sunshine and Mandy. The date I have for Blue Sunshine is 1977, although I guess when I was looking it up a couple places, I don't know if it was IMDb or Wikipedia, listed as 78. So I just stuck with the 77 number because within the storyline of Blue Sunshine, which we'll get to in just a second, it's being made in 1977. They're constantly referencing 10 years ago when the main characters were in college. And 10 years before then, obviously, simple math, 1967. In 1967, there is a string of movies, two of which actually came out that year in particular, that are pretty well known, especially if you're into like cult films and different things like that, or stuff we've mentioned over the years on the show. You've got The Trip with Peter Fonda, Bruce Dern, and Dennis Hopper, kind of in a pre Easy Rider combo there. Dennis Hopper is just the drug dealer. He's not really like one of the main stars, but it's all about LSD. It's about Peter Fonda plays like a television director, or I think he makes commercials for television or something, and he's going to take LSD for the first time. So the movie works as a guide for the audience through what is it like tripping on acid, taking LSD, and then it visually tries to recreate some of like the trippiness of taking acid. But also that year, a movie that I found through the good old Something Weird Video is a movie called The Acid Eaters, directed by Byron Mabe. I just got to read you the description. It's one sentence on Letterboxd for this. A group of office workers go every Friday afternoon to the White Pyramid, a 50-foot tower of LSD.
That's just amazing.
It is. The definition of a cult film. I did rate it a star and a half when I saw it because it's fucking terrible. But it's one of those like, yeah, this is like, it's drive-in fodder, I guess, kind of the way I was looking at it. It's, it's a zero budget movie that just lots of like long takes with like music of the day that they could easily get rights to. And it's absurd. But those are both the 1967 movies. And then as I was looking into it, I was like, you know what? I wonder if it's out there. I feel like I've heard of, or I've seen the title of a movie that's like the reefer madness of LSD movies. Does that sound familiar to you at all?
I've never heard of such a thing.
It just feels like that's what it should have been made, like the horrors of LSD, like the way that Reefer Madness, ends up being unintentionally funny and absurd because it's full of nonsense. I was like, there's got to be one of those about LSD, right? And I was poking around and I just was not finding it. And I was like, I really swear this was a thing. But in poking around, I did discover an educational film from 1969 called Case Study LSD.
I first dropped acid when I was 18. I was over at these people's house one night. This guy I went to school with was over there and asked me if I wanted to try some acid. I had read about it in the newspapers and heard a few friends talk about it, so I was curious. I was pretty jacked up on marijuana, so I decided to try it, and I dropped it. I don't know what I was waiting for, a flash or a rush or whatever, but I kept sitting there waiting, and nothing was happening. So I got up and then went to the dresser and put on a pair of pink capris and a green and brown blouse. I thought the colors were beautiful. So we tripped down to Market Street, and I decided to buy a hot dog.
It's like 3-4 minutes long. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. It's on YouTube.
From Lockheed Martin?
It's made by Lockheed Martin. Yes. So in the middle of making the weapons of war for Vietnam, they're also putting out this like 4-minute short about case study LSD. It's all still photos and then really what looks like close-up shots of a lava lamp. And it's a girl talking about how she's already at a reefer party, basically. Like, I've already smoking marijuana. And then my friend's like, let's do LSD. So I do some LSD. And then guess what they do, Isaac? They take a walk to a local hot dog stand.
Sounds about right.
I was very hungry. And I had put mustard and ketchup and relish in the usual. And I put the hot dog up to my mouth, and somebody started screaming. I didn't know what was happening, so I looked up at my friend Terry and said, "Did you hear that?" Didn't you hear someone scream? He said no. I got the hot dog up to my mouth again, and I was ready to bite, and the scream got louder. And it hit me. No, it couldn't be. And I looked down at the hot dog, and there was a face on him. Eyes, nose, a mouth. I had put the ketchup to where it looked like his hair. And he started telling me that I couldn't eat him. That he had a wife and 7 kids at home to support.
Right. And then as she goes to bite into the hot dog, she sees a face on the hot dog. It kind of looks like, in the photos of it, it looks like they stuffed like a troll doll inside a bun. And she freaks out and stomps the hot dog on the ground. And then they walk away, and that's the end of the movie. So I don't know what it's trying to say.
You'll see faces on hot dogs, which, you know, to be clear, isn't great. Right? Like, I don't want to see faces on hot dogs. There's a lot of things I might want to see on anything, but like,
I don't eat hot dogs for other reasons, but yeah, no, I definitely don't want that on my hot dog. But it's not like I don't know, is it a scare tactic? Like, it's really kind of baffling. And if you've got 4 minutes, like I said, click on the link. I'll put it in the show notes. It's just one of those head scratchers. Also, I didn't realize that Lockheed Martin was making educational films, so now I have another project I got to look up.
Oh, yeah.
Report back on the I'll report back on the show if anything comes up that's interesting there. But of course, they were making education films. Why not? But that speaks to what was going on in the culture late 60s. Seems to be like, this is when, LSD hits in a big way. Obviously, like the hippie movement's right there. It's ripe for that. Expand your mind. Counterculture in general is huge. It kind of makes sense. And then when we get to Blue Sunshine, it's a movie all dealing with, okay, 10 years later, like we kind of mentioned at the top of the show, that 60s hangover. What have we got going on here in 1977 America when Blue Sunshine is set?
I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, that's just it. It is checking in on that cultural moment in a sense. I connect it to a couple of non-horror movies. The really clear one would be The Big Fix, which is a movie we've talked about on this podcast.
Oh, the Richard Dreyfuss one.
The Richard Dreyfuss one from 1978. Because what is that? That is literally a 10 years later, ex-radicals, conspiracy theories. It's a noir, and people running for office.
True.
Which is part of Blue Sunshine. I don't think any of that is an accident. I mean, it very much is, we're hitting 30 or 31 or 32 or like our early 30s. People have sold out. People are not, or people are either adrift, or they've sold out, or they're running for office as kind of liberally politicians.
Change the system from within kind of vibe there.
But, are you though?
But not, right, no.
In a very much late 70s sort of way. I think it's it's an interesting trend. I don't know how much more of it there is. I mean, Return of the Secaucus 7, which is like 1980, is also dealing with some of the same themes, but I mean, honestly, in a different way with some similarities. But it's, it is like facing that growing up thing to a certain degree.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really interesting trend. I'd like to see if there's more of those. I mean, there's definitely a lot of the 60s are over movies.
Yeah, but that's very specific.
But yeah, that's specifically like we're hitting like 30 to 33. What the fuck happened?
Yeah, it's almost like some processing some feelings of a midlife crisis for writers, directors, and possibly some actors that are also producing these movies at the same time.
Except that, I mean, they're not midlife crises. That's the thing, is your early 30s is not your midlife. They're processing losing, right? They're processing the party being, not the party, but the movements in a way, and the experiences and the counter, really having sort of like, they're processing growing up, right? So they're processing being out of their 20s, which is one thing, right? Which is a very specific experience. I mean, which varies depending on your life cycle, but especially these are people who went to college as opposed to going straight into work. And then it's also processing like the late 70s, you're like, the party really is over. There's still Maoists and some communists, and people are like, this could still happen, but it's like, it's pretty over. And I think that's our, so I think about this in comparison to myself, because I'm barely in my mid-30s now. I'm sort of moving into my late 30s. And I've mentioned there's like nearly a 12-year cycle now of protest and radicalization. I got involved in movements during the Bush years, frankly, so my late teens and early 20s, which was sort of the afterglow of the anti-globalization movement. So like that was another cycle, but a relatively weak one, to be honest, but like important. And then the anti-war movement, which, but then we entered into this thing in like my mid 20s of this cycle, which just hasn't ended yet. Right. I mean, it's in this rough patch, a downward path, but now we have more strikes. Now there's always seems to be a movement. So like the crisis doesn't end. So I haven't gone through this experience that they're having. It's a very different.
Oh, I see what you mean.
I've never experienced like that. We're going under, but my parents did. So it's one that interests me a lot.
Well, I was kind of wondering, like, if it's kind of a reckoning with like coming to an end in the mid and into the late 70s, or these radical movements that were, honestly, a lot of them just, snuffed out, if not some leaders just straight up assassinated by the government in order to, dampen the mood, dampen any kind of movement there. It seems like it's a good thing if we're not getting like definitive ends here, and it just can kind of like roll into becoming more and more, I mean, even if they are a little fractured movement wise, but there's so many of them. If you're, pick any given activist topic, and there's like a pretty well-ish known kind of movement that's working on that at this particular point in time. So hopefully we never have to deal with, in our lifetimes, like some sudden end to it.
I want to make clear that the movements didn't end. Certainly they became smaller and weaker, but things didn't end. Things happened in the 80s. They become less of the focus of the culture. They're sort of defeated to a certain degree, but it never goes away. We never have a moment in which there isn't a left. We never have a moment in which there isn't leftist but movements. And part of the propaganda is that they disappear.
That's a good point.
That's part of it is, right? Like,
Yeah, I was speaking more from like a film history point of view, not like a movement history. Like within its representation in film, like you really got to dig in and find some like, really interesting indie stuff, or foreign films obviously are a whole different story. But like you really have to dig in and find some indie stuff in America. Like you said, John Sayles, Caucus 7, that's early 80s. Like it's still there in some of the art, but the way that it was kind of mainstreamed, especially in film art in the 60s and 70s, we're just not getting through the 80s.
Yeah.
But yeah, from movement history, like, real life, yeah, there's an ebb and flow, but nothing's completely gone. So what we've got here with Blue Sunshine is a very interesting movie, but also since we rag on the mostly poor synopsis we find on IMDb or Letterboxd when we're trying to give a quick synopsis of a movie, we've got a pretty solid one, I think, for Blue Sunshine. I think it helps that it's more than just one sentence, so that kind of helps fill in a little bit of the gaps. But in case you're unfamiliar with Blue Sunshine, it is from 1977. I believe at the point of this recording, it is streaming only on Shudder right now, so hopefully it's out there. Or, like we say, physical media is very handy because it's always available to you, so purchase it if you can afford it. 1977, directed by Jeff Lieberman. At a party, a partygoer goes insane and murders 3 people. Falsely accused of the killings, Jerry, who is also at the party, is now on the run. More bizarre killings continue with alarming frequency all over town, and some of them are like mass killings as well. Trying to clear his name, Jerry is forced to kind of dig in and try to solve this mystery. He discovers the shocking truth that people are losing their hair and turning into violent psychopaths, and the connection may be some LSD all of the murderers took a decade ago because they were all at the same college buying from the same dealer.
1967. Doctors and scientists predicted it. Blue Sunshine.
Did you ever hear the words Blue Sunshine back in school?
Jerry didn't do this. Like this.
Sick!
One man must solve the mystery. The victims. Wendy Fleming, divorcee.
Randy!
Blue Sunshine. John O'Malley, Lieutenant, Los Angeles Police Department. Blue Sunshine. Franny Scott.
I found
photographer.
Just in time. Hey, wait a minute.
Blue Sunshine. Wayne Mulligan, campaign manager. Blue Sunshine. Dr. David Bloom,
Kelly.
resident surgeon.
Give me a sponge. I said a long instrument.
1977. The nightmare has begun. Blue Sunshine.
And, you know, so part of it is we're combining 70s conspiracy thriller with
Yes. Yeah.
accused man on the run with
Oh, I hadn't really thought about it that way. You're totally right.
I mean, to be honest, you know, part of it is I was reading an overview on Sin Excess, where they're sort of talking, you know, I think they're looking over Jeff Lieberman's filmography. And so I was looking at that. I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Well, and also I watched it again. I think the first time I watched it was too late at night. And it's like, oh yeah, that's what's going on here. The other thing is that this is supposed to be a social satire.
That's what he says.
And I think he's trying. I mean, the way I understand it from what I've read is he's trying to say that he's trying to make fun of what the government says about LSD. But
it's also true.
Well, the problem is the movie is really, really straight, right? Like it's super serious.
Yes.
So the movie follows a guy named Zitkin, who's called Zippy, who is sort of like a lost soul post 60s, right? Like, I mean, he quit his last corporate job because of inequality for women in the workplace. And he's in and out of work. And he went to an Ivy League school. He went to Cornell. And he's out in a cabin with a bunch of friends. And one of his friends has all of his hair fall off, runs into the woods. When they chase after them, he comes back and then pushes three of their friends who are women into a fire. Then then attempts to kill Zippy, and Zippy is able to take him out by pushing him in the way of a truck or of a semi. I want to ask you an opening question with this.
Yeah.
I mean, I like this movie a lot for a lot of reasons. I don't think it works, but I like it.
Yeah.
The opening thing where he's quickly like feels framed and is on the run, considering that their friend had just acted really freaking weird, and that when the guys in the semi truck who hit him were actually seeing them struggle and fight with each other, does everyone act like they're on crazy pills just at the beginning of the movie? Like it seems like they really have to force him being in trouble.
This is, I think I got your question right here, but this is one of the problems I have with the movie is there's like two things going on in each scene. One is like, here's the plot and what needs to happen. But then it doesn't seem like it's either written or directed well enough to like actually have people acting like humans. Yes. Or having like natural reactions, or giving the audience a sense of like, oh, that's how you need at least a character that would be like, oh, that's how I would react. Like that gives us a connection with these characters, if not some actual empathy. And I'm connected to the characters insofar that I'm like, what the fuck is going on? I'm interested, and it's a hook. I'll keep watching it, but they're acting the way they're acting because that's how the plot needs to move along or happen.
Yeah.
In a lot of this. And Jerry Zippy, oh my God, Zalman King drives me up a wall with his performance this entire movie. It works a little bit at the end when he has to be more frantic and freaking out, but he just looks stoned out of his mind and barely there and remembering his lines for most of this movie.
So here's the thing. The first time I would have agreed with you. The second time I kind of loved what he was doing, but he's not acting like a human.
No, he's not acting like a human, but also I was going to say on the plus side, he sticks with it. So it doesn't feel like an erratic performance. It's sort of more like a Crispin Glover vibe of like, why are you making these choices?
Why are you
And it's fascinating, but he's consistent with it. So it's clear, like I'm doing something. I just don't know if I'm really on board with it or not.
Right. I mean, it's just, yeah, he's so intense and over the top. And frankly, yeah, why would anyone believe this person? Because he seems completely out of his mind.
It seems like he's interacting with friends, especially when he talks to like his doctor friend, as we'll mention, because there's a couple plot points I want to mention with him. It just seems like his doctor friend half the time when they're having conversations should be doing one of these like like trying to get his attention back. And I'm like, are we having a conversation here? What are you doing right now?
It's totally true. I mean, I think this is part of this is one of these beautiful sort of like, I'm not sure this totally works, but I love it for how it doesn't work, and I love it for what it's trying to do. But like, I don't know if love is too strong. There's also some interesting stuff where like he has trauma responses, like so flashback trauma responses. So after his friend does this, he's on the run. He has to figure out what's going on and how this happened. And there's a cop who kills his wife and family and a neighbor and a dog who also went bald suddenly. And he goes to the site and there's like blood all over everything. And he's basically having trauma responses just looking at this and imagining what's happened. And there's a point where he's choking an imaginary version of this guy.
Wait, who's the he and we and this guy here you're talking about now? Is this still the cop story?
Yeah, he's choking the cop who isn't there, right? Like the cop murdered him, shot himself, who committed suicide at the end of his killing spree.
Yeah.
And Zipkin is choking an imaginary version of this guy out of rage and frustration and fear or whatever. He's having a weird trauma response, which also could feel like a drug-induced hallucination, or it could be like he's has PTSD. And there's another second like that. So at the final climax of the movie, which is in a mall at a political rally, the politician who, just spoilers to be clear, who actually was a drug dealer in college. Look at the corruption. Look at the sins of our political class.
Wait, he's the drug dealer. He was dealing the blue sunshine. He's the reason why all this is happening.
Who 10 years ago, the blue sunshine that warped people's chromosomes, and 10 years later, like clockwork, is causing all of this, has a puppet show. Like he's hired like a puppet show as like the entertainment for this thing. And he has a moment where he has a flashback to his friend who was crooning like one of the puppets is crooning at the party, his friend who went crazy and killed people.
The party at the opening scene.
Right. And there is a moment, just a few seconds, in which there is literally a puppet version of his friend.
I also wanted to mention, too, the way that we're describing this isn't a movie where like the main character is on LSD on the run trying to solve a crime. This is all like in the past. We don't see them actively, except for like maybe at the party, but like you're not seeing them actively like taking drugs throughout the story. It's not like told in a Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas trippy kind of aesthetic or visuals.
No, not at all.
So these little moments, like you're saying, are highlighted and really, really punctuated. Like the puppet thing, when the puppet changes and it was like, okay, it makes you think then, oh, something's happening to the main character, because we're not seeing like visions, quote unquote, or hallucinations throughout the story. So these moments stand out.
Yeah, well, it is the one where I'm sort of like, is this a trauma response? Or part of it is, I think there's some interesting craft work throughout the film in terms of shooting and so forth. Like, Lieberman knows what he wants in that regard, at least.
Yeah.
I mean, so there's scenes, I think the most intense scenes for me, one of the victims of this LSD is watching some children and slowly losing it.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, was like an incredibly tension-filled scene for me, because I'm like, how far will this movie go?
Exactly. I want to piggyback off mentioning that scene specifically, because we have this character who lives in an apartment complex, and she's babysitting these two younger kids. I don't know, like 6 and 8 maybe, or something like that, from somebody who lives like down the hall from her. And you're kind of watching her sequence. Like we cut back and forth. Maybe it's the editing here, because it's multiple narratives going on, even though pretty clearly like Zippy's our main guy. But then all of a sudden we'll have a scene with this woman and the two kids, or this woman and her adult neighbor friend. And her hair is like slowly coming out, little chunk here, little chunk there. And she's kind of freaked out. She's clearly freaked out about it. But that's intercut with like the cop scene, like you said, doing his mass murder, and then also Zippy doing the investigation. So as an audience, we know like, oh shit, she's one of the ones that took. I mean, it's slowly revealed once Zippy figures out like, oh, it traces back to this blue sunshine LSD 10 years ago. These people took it. Oh shit, who else is friends? Who is this part of this group that we need to get to before they commit a mass killing? And he doesn't know who she is yet, but as the audience, we've seen a few scenes of her, and she's showing the symptoms of like, oh shit, she's gonna be one of these people, and she is almost exclusively around these two little kids. And you're like, oh my god, am I gonna see a mass murder scene with like these two kids? And it goes right up into the edge of it. Like she has a knife out and she's really ready to go for it. When Zippy arrives, in time, but like I was fully expected to see like a mass killing, here of like a couple of kids, stabbing on her way out of the building. Who knows what?
Right. I'm like, that is because they've already had off-screen murder of children. So like, are we just gonna jump over? So
my barometer was the dog. Like once the dog was killed, I was like, oh, he may knife a kid, or at least see the after effects of like a kid laying there with blood on him or something.
We sort of talked about like, I think this is a movie that is supposed to be making fun of. It's supposed to be satirical because I mean, the play here would be that, government and the establishment have really silly views of LSD. Look at what they think it does. Oh, look at the horrible consequences of somebody dealing some drugs in college, which is basically the politician, which then leads to all this,
Oh, wait, actually, sorry, can I interrupt you real quick, Isaac? Key detail. The woman with the kids is the politician's estranged wife or soon to be divorced wife. Yes. They just divorced her. I can't remember if it's in the works, but like that's connected to the politician as well. So former drug dealers, now hopeful politician's ex-wife. Sorry.
So like that would be the play that's being done with this is in a normal conspiracy movie in which there actually is the conspiracy and why you shouldn't trust politics, why, post-Nixon crisis of faith. There's some sort of conspiracy or he's done something in his past or something like that. And of course, in this case, it's something that I think the filmmaker thinks is frankly just not that big a deal, but that the culture has turned into a huge deal. So it's the conspiracy of his past is the detritus of the 60s, selling LSD while at Harvard. Stanford? I think Harvard.
I thought it was something with a C, but...
Oh, well, no, Zippy went to Cornell.
Oh, he went to Cornell, right? Okay.
These are.
Oh, yeah, right. Because he's not part of like, is he or is he not going to go crazy as well? I think that would have been an interesting kind of ticking time bomb to have him also part of that friend group and like, oh shit, I may go crazy any minute. I need to solve this and get an antidote or whatever.
I mean, it's just a bunch of Ivy League grads going after each other. But it's like, you see what I mean? So like, that's the outline that you're going through. The satire is taking the conspiracy theory framework and then saying, yeah, but this is a really silly conspiracy. Because,
I see what you're saying.
Right. I think that's what he's trying to do here, but it doesn't play that way.
No, it really doesn't. Also, I think see if this works for you too, because I think this ties with the satire. I think the satire may have been complete or maybe more interesting or worked for us if the politician dude who turns out was the drug dealer the whole time, like there's no finishing for him. Like his bodyguard's the guy that goes crazy in the mall /discotheque /puppet show scene, but you never get a finale with like the politician guy,
right?
You don't get a final scene with him. He's just Fleming. He presumably also took it. So like, where's the narrative wrap up for his part of it?
Well, maybe he never took it, right? I mean, that's the thing about these corrupt politicians,
Oh, I thought you were going to say drug dealers. Yeah, you don't get high on your own supply.
You don't get high on your supply, right? They don't have to face the consequences of their actions, really. Like. Ford.
I guess, but then show me that. Like maybe the satire ending then is like he gets elected.
Right. Something. I mean, part of it is like I said, I think it's I love movies like this where it's like mixed up in what it's trying to do, but it's trying to do something ambitious. And I also think this is really well made. I think there's some really haunting images. I think there's one of the little side bits in terms of tone. So Zippy has a girlfriend who's helping him out in all this, who honestly, just by the way he manhandles her, should have dropped him. I mean, he's not, it's just, he's so intense and like grabbing her by the shoulders. I'm like, oh my God, like chill. Wow.
Yeah. Take a breath. Yeah. That's what I'm saying about like the erratic performance. We're like, what tone do you want for the scene? Cause it's all just seems like coked up energy.
But this, played by Alicia Sweeney. And so she's trying to get information from him. And he's of course trying to stay safe, get out of here. And people just yell so loud in this movie. And, but actually she's like fairly effective, frankly, in rooting out and making connections. But part of the reason she's able to do that is that, our politician's bodyguard, who's also, I think he's like more of a campaign manager, is another, is the guy who goes crazy at the end of the movie that you mentioned. Ex-football player.
Did the most LSD of all of them, was just like, oh, he was a freak for it, or like they make some comment of like, okay, so here's our main villain that he's gonna have to face off with.
Well, it's the jock, right? It's the jock who wouldn't have been a hippie, who did the most drugs. There we go. But he's also like a real creep, and he's a huge guy, and they really get across. I mean, he does such a good job with menace in this movie, and so the feeling of being a woman who is being hit on very like aggressively. He never gets physical, but like aggressively, just hit the looks.
Well, he shoots him at a low angle too, so you really notice like how imposing he is physically.
Right. You can really tell how. I just thought that was so well done, and
it is. Yeah, it is. And she doesn't play it off as like she's a very smart character. She's not just like, oh, okay, she's not saying yes to a date or anything because she's physically intimidated by him, although there's a little factor there. Yeah. She's part of this investigation, and now once they start working with the cops too, she's like, oh, I know where this guy will be, because she knows she can get this guy to the bar, and then have the cops for the backup too, and also they can clear hopefully her boyfriend's name as well. So she's an active player in the investigation.
Well, and part of it is her initial, she meets this guy twice, and her initial turning him down is really, I think, well done, because it's like,
yes,
you're really just trying to keep your guards up, because if you give any room for this guy, and in movies you see constantly like very aggressive style, certainly in this period or before or after, very aggressive style flirting from men or harassing from men that just works. Including being very...
Oh, like in the movies, you mean?
Yeah, in the movies.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know if that is something that worked in the 60s or now for that matter, but like, or the 60s or 70s. Like,
it just moves the narrative along pretty quick, I guess. But
it's also, these are movies made by men usually.
Well, there's that too.
So I think, but I really like seeing that. It was well done.
Yeah. I'm wondering too, if comparatively, like if this era, when the 70s, especially 77, mid to late 70s, when it comes out, if we didn't have an embarrassment of riches as far as like political thrillers go, maybe this would seem like a better movie or have grabbed us a little better. But if it's around like, everything from, I was thinking of Parallax View ever since you've said political thrillers of this, but you also have like even much earlier, obviously Manchurian Candidate. There's throughout the 70s, there's the whole run that I'm totally spacing on the director's name now, that did all the President's Men and Clute and Parallax View. Like it's all these paranoid thrillers that are around in this time period. Maybe this would be higher up on my list if there wasn't such stiff competition for this era with that genre.
No, I actually think it's that this just doesn't work. I know what you're saying when there's like some masterpiece level ones.
Yeah.
There's other ones you didn't even mention, but like, I think it's that literally, this is somebody who has a huge amount of mastery over tone, I guess in the sense of suspense, but not over the overall tone of the movie.
Yeah. I wonder how much actually was just good editing.
Good point.
Did you have anything else on Blue Sunshine, Isaac?
Yeah, no, I don't know. I think, I just don't. I've tried to compliment this movie on because it there's a reason it's a cult classic. It's a good horror movie. It's a lot of fun, and once again, like the ways that it doesn't work are actually really interesting. It's like the mechanics are off, but it doesn't make a bad movie. It just makes a really weird one.
But it's not fully, it's like missed opportunity kind of movie. It's not fully bad, but it's also not fully awesome to me that I was going to go back and rewatch it. Maybe with a crowd it'd be all right, but it also has so many elements where you're like, oh, you got a bunch of stuff right here. Like, God damn it, why aren't you better?
I really appreciated it more on the second watch in terms of what I was trying to do. But yeah, okay. I see what you mean. But there's just some very striking imagery. Now, a movie called Blue Sunshine that has a blue moon both at the beginning and the end during the title credits is also an interesting choice. Anyway.
And I wrote in my notes too, I was like, did that parrot just say the name of the movie? Because there's like a parrot around at some point and it says like Blue Sunshine right when the title appears on screen. More weirdness, I guess. I don't know.
Good stuff.
Yeah. So like I said, I think I might, maybe in a group situation, it would play better on a second viewing for me, but
right.
The other movie we're talking about today, I have seen in a group a group screening of it, and it works like gangbusters. And that's Mandy from 2018. This is, I believe, written and directed by Panos Cosmatos.
Under the crimson, primordial sky, the wretched warlock reached into the dark embrace. His fist closed around the serpent's eye. Strange and eternal.
I need you to get me that girl I saw. Do you know what to do?
You're a special one, Mandy. I, too, am a special one. Let us be so very special together.
So what you gonna do with that thing?
I'm going hunting.
So what you hunting?
It's crazy evil.
Panos' film, his second film, Mandy, after doing Beyond the Black Rainbow, is I don't know. It seems like it's fairly credited with like the Nicolas Cage renaissance of like, this is how you use Nicolas Cage in a movie, folks. Kind of era of his career.
It really, I mean, for me, I never was on the like sort of the Mandy. I mean, I'm not Mandy, the Nicolas Cage trip, and it was never into goofy Nicolas Cage. I just thought he'd sort of lost it, which was foolish, and I admit it. And I'm sorry.
I don't think it's foolish. There's a ton of just terrible shit he was making for a long stretch of his career.
It's true.
And like 6 movies a year of crap at some points. And he's even on record as like, yeah, I had bills to pay. I had a lot of debt.
Yeah.
So, culturally he had a vibe. It was, people loved him, but it was kind of a joke.
But part of his people were confusing that with him being a bad actor.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yes. Yeah.
And so part of it is like the things he was doing there, people thought he was doing bad acting as opposed to he knew exactly what he was doing. And Mandy, and then, there's been a whole bunch of really good stuff that he's been in recently, but the one that stands out for me is Mandy and then Pig, which I would very much like to cover, which is a reminder that he can do incredibly subtle work. And Mandy is a reminder that when he goes big, if it's in the right movie, it works perfectly. This is one of the most annoying and favorite theater experiences because there was an asshole drunk the first time I watched it in the theaters.
That doesn't help.
He wouldn't shut the fuck up. But it was also a crowd that was there to watch. Oh, he's going to be crazy. It's going to be Nicolas Cage.
Right.
And that was not they didn't get that movie.
Well, I mean, he's in a chainsaw battle by the end of the movie. They got that movie. It's just that it wasn't that movie the whole way through. They spent a good, what is it like? It's like 45, 50 minutes. Like the most of the movie is like relationship drama and fever dream kind of mood at punch in the gut. And then he gets to go full Cage by the last 20, 25 minutes.
But the thing is that what they came there to do is laugh at Nicolas Cage.
That's what it was, yes.
And they didn't get to do that at any point during the movie because what he's acting like is completely appropriate for the world that he's in. So there's a scene midway through in which he's sitting in his underwear, drinking hard alcohol in his bathroom, sobbing and crying as loud as he can. And at that point, everyone is silent. And one person starts to laugh and nobody joins them and they just shut the fuck up. And that, to me, that is fucking cinema right there. Because everyone came thinking they were going to do one thing, and this movie has completely enwrapped them. Let's talk about what this movie is.
So if you're unfamiliar with Mandy, Nicolas Cage and Andrea Riseborough play the main couples. His name is Red. Her name is Mandy. The movie's named after. It's 1983. They live a solitary existence up in the mountains. She's an author and an artist, but also works part-time. I think it's a gas station, isn't it?
It's like a
or a convenience shop or something.
Local store.
Local store.
Yeah.
And as you know, bad luck would have it, a crazy religious cult, the Children of the New Dawn, are coming through town, or they come in. I think they get supplies, whatever. Anyway, they spot her, and the leader, played by Lioness Roche, spots her and is like, "Oh, I want her." So, in order to capture her, his minions within the cult, they summon the Black Skulls, which is a demonic biker gang cranked up on LSD, some sort of special liquid LSD, and they kidnap Mandy. She gets dosed with LSD, but when she laughs at the leader, he can't take it anymore because he's got the fragilest fucking ego that's ever existed. They burn her alive right in front of Red, Nicolas Cage, her partner. And the scene that you're talking about, Isaac, is like the most grief-stricken scene where he's sitting in his underwear, drinks an entire bottle of vodka. It's all one take. And you just watch Nicolas Cage transform from like utter, like blubbering grief into just screaming, articulated rage and outrage as he just chugs an entire bottle of vodka, and then bloody, bloody, bloody revenge is had.
But all of it on drugs, right? Like, I mean, it's hard to even explain. I mean, we will, but this whole movie is a bad trip. And at a certain point, are things happening? Are they not? What we're seeing on screen, it's a descent into madness. I mean, so part of it is the aesthetic of this movie, and what it is basically a 80s metal cover come to life, right?
Album cover, yeah.
Cover.
Yeah.
That is actually what this movie is. And it fits because it's partially about the detritus of the 60s, because the cult is that, right? Like the cult is the twisted counterculture, cult counterculture. Part of the reason that this works so well, I mean, this is a movie which is very much in danger of being extremely tropey, because you kill the female lead to motivate the male lead. It's called fridging. It's boring as hell. It's not good. It is ultimately sort of a sexist framework for making movies, and it is common, easy motivator. But they actually spend a huge amount of time with Mandy, and she's very much a character in herself, and we see their relationship. And so by the time this happens, whether the trope is applied or not, fine. By the time this happens, it's devastating.
I think it's a trope if you don't take the time to build the character the way they do in this movie. This one, I think the structure is probably more comparable to like Psycho, where you're with a main character. And if you don't know the plot of this movie, which obviously if you listen to this, we just spoiled the whole thing for you. But if you don't really know the plot of the movie, she feels like and is established like a main character the same way Marion Crane is in Psycho, where you're like, when her killing, you're like, wait, is the movie done? Like that's our main character. It's an earned relationship that they have together. And that way it's a blow to the audience when she's taken away, the same way it's a blow to him, rather than just being a trope or a device to kick the plot off.
And part of it is, so they get ambushed in their home by the demonic bikers, who are like, this is what I mean about like the reality and unreality. Are they demons? Are they actual demons? Or are they what Bill Dukes in a fantastic cameo will explain to us as a bunch of basically a biker gang that pissed off the ROG drug kingpin and ended up, or drug lab, and ended up taking a really bad batch and just going completely out of their mind.
Yeah, now they're just nuts. Yeah.
They're nuts, and they've deformed themselves. They do seem like demons or creatures. One of them has a razor blade on his dick. Like it's not, they're not okay.
No. But also it's the way that the film is shot as well. Shout out to Benjamin Loeb, who's the cinematographer, who's working with Panos here. But so you can describe them as like, this is just a biker gang who's lost their minds literally to, tainted LSD, who knows how many years ago, and live out in the woods because that's just where they're living. And the cult summons them, like a minion from the cult actually blows like a carved out specific horn, and it's shot with like glowing red lights and the moon's out. Like it's shot trippy as hell. Like you said, almost like a metal album cover. Is he summoning them from the depths of hell? It kind of is filmed like they come out of the earth that way.
Right.
Or is he just blowing this like horn, like the signal, because he knows the biker gang is over, two hollers away in the hills here, and they'll, come when they hear that noise. That's their call, or who knows?
Exactly. And part of it is since this movie is on drugs, and increasingly on drugs as characters get it more on drugs from the outset. And so, and I mean, the other reference point is sort of 70s and 80s sort of sci-fi novels. I mean, she's reading one that sort of play into sort of,
right,
into sort of Lovecraftian themes.
Very
right?
much. Yeah.
So is the mythology of this cult real to a certain degree or not? I mean, it's not, right? But they've made up all this stuff, and it's, in a certain sense, it doesn't matter, because if enough people
No.
believe all this stuff, then it is.
Well, and it's also it's brilliant in its structure because she's not reading a story that's like about the biker gang itself, if I remember correctly. She's just reading this like general like fantasy, like you said, Lovecraftian type story. But because we hear that and then we see a scene where a biker gang is like potentially summoned from the depths of hell, like it's put together in the audience's brain, even if that's not literally what the plot is.
Well, there's literally passages where it's like, the wretched warlock coming. I mean, these are real novel. I just don't know which one. I mean, I think it's actually on screen. But, the wretched warlock, da, 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 and that's like directly compared to
To the biker gang.
Well, no, to the cult leader.
Oh, right. Yes.
So it's directly, it's the parallels are directly there. I mean, it's the novel. We live in a world, this world, right? I mean, the final shot of this movie is Red riding off after having massacred this cult. I mean, he's already killed the bikers and he's massacred the cult, and you can see the landscape transforming into the alien space of the fantasy world. I mean, the other major reference point for this is heavy metal, obviously, like
yeah.
So because there's points at which it's animated, and when he imagines and has nightmares about Mandy after she's died, it's in heavy metal style animation.
Yeah.
So like all of this is happening, but I'd like to jump back. So like they get the biker gang breaks in, and they take Mandy, and the women of the cult prepare her to meet. I mean, so basically what's happened is that the leader of the cult wants, basically is into her. Jeremiah Sand is into her, and so they're basically they hop her up on LSD and a whole bunch of stuff.
It's like it's LSD and like spider venom or something, because like it slowly ups the ante. We're like, okay, wait, what now?
But well, I'd never thought of this. Is that happening? Like, is the giant wasp or whatever there, or
the wasp? Yeah, no, I mean, on screen it looks like they dose her with like LSD mixed with wasp venom.
Oh my god. And so she has this. There's this scene where everything. So this is the building up of her character. She is the character that we see things from when she meets the cult. She absolutely tripping. So she sees everything through that, and he's Jeremiah Sand is like explaining his deal and takes off his robe, and it's full frontal for dude, and then plays his fucking album, his god awful album,
psychedelic folk music. Isaac,
he's better. He's pretty sure he's even better than the Carpenters.
Yeah, how Manson can you get, right?
And she laughs at him, and it his toxic masculine bubble pops, and he freaks out, and that's why he kills her, because she can't take him seriously, because he's a joke.
Yeah.
So I think when you see the buildup of her character and that she is the character, and we get some stuff where Red is the main. We get basically their co-leads until she's killed. Yeah, I guess it's going back. It works,
and it's rare that you see them without each other too.
Yeah.
Up to that point, it's definitely it's the relationship specifically there. So yeah, obviously he's good and properly pissed and outraged and furious. She's tied, gagged, or he's tied and gagged. I think they use barbed wire, if I remember. Like it's one of those like, oh god, like you cringe. And then they, like I said, they burn her alive right in front of him, and it's just Ash when he comes to. I believe this is the part we were talking about with that the scene in the house, in the bathroom. This massively just like it's a one take shot that you. I can't imagine how many takes they did of this one. It's some of the most raw. It's some of the most raw acting I can remember. Like there's few scenes that stick in your head when you're like, oh my gosh, like those moments that just really, really hit you. And I'm glad that it worked the way it did with the audience you saw, Isaac, because that's such a perfect illustration of like, this is the talent that Cage is capable of if you give him the right story and the right character and the right space to do his thing.
Right. If you actually give him good material, he can really work wonders with it.
So yeah, he goes, like I said, bloody revenge is enacted across, and it kind of works your way up the way that you would. I was trying to think of like an 80s or kind of a 70s analogy here, because it just feels like very video game style to me. First, you go after like the biker gang, you go after the lower tier folks, so you have those battles. Again, he's just like, at one point, I think there's a scene where he's like, he takes cocaine and then downs some LSD in the same scene. But it gets progressively crazier and crazier as he works his way up through the motorcycle gang, up into the lower tier folks of the cult, until you can get to the final boss of the cult.
I mean, part of it is we're seeing sort of in a certain sense an epic journey, like a hero's journey, layers, a descent into the underworld in the sense of like Greek mythology, but all through like weird, like northern, I mean, like the Shadow Mountains, I guess, are in Northern California, like weird, sort of the parts that are really the Pacific Northwest. I mean, he's a logger. I mean, it's not surprising. And he, through like, I don't know, it's just what. So yeah, he takes out the biker gang. Midway through that, after taking out a couple of them, he takes presumably some LSD from their batch, the one that drove
the bad stash.
And cocaine.
I remember he also has just chugged an entire bottle of vodka.
Right. And this is the state he's in through the rest of the movie.
Yeah. But it also ends up working like he's, I keep using the video game things, but it's more like he's like, now I got the invincible star. Now I got this new one up. Now I got this extra power here. Because none of it's like, giving him a heart attack or, killing him. He's more like powered up and ready for the next battle. And actually, the way you're describing it too, more like hero's journey style, Isaac, it made me realize, doesn't he, like, he makes his own axe at one point too, right?
Oh yeah. So basically when he decides to go hunting, that he has to hunt down the biker gang first. He goes, and apparently, so there's a whole history here, right? He goes to a trailer with Bill Duke, a favorite of this podcast.
Absolutely.
Basically, to go get information about what the deal with the biker gang is, where their deal is explained, but also to pick up his crossbow.
Oh, his crossbow, that's right.
He picks up his crossbow and these special arrows that Bill Duke has made, and then he also, in the same preparation, forges his own absurdly 80s metal axe.
That's what it was. Yeah, like you said, right off of a heavy metal album cover in the 80s,
or a fantasy film. It's just wild. I should be trying to pull more political stuff out of this. So, for instance, the first scene, they're playing King Crimson. This is such an incredibly metal movie with no metal in it, but instead an incredible soundtrack by the late
Johan Johansson.
Yeah, Johan Johansson.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I listened to that today when I was writing up some notes. I was like, I'm going to put that on. We're going to talk about it later tonight. And I was waiting for like the big like metal riffs and like what my imagination what my brain remembers of like watching the movie. And I was like, this is a fucking killer score, but it's really subdued.
Right. Well, so they start with King Crimson, which is prog rock, right? Which is a great needle drop at the beginning, and then he's driving up to the house he shares with Mandy, and like Reagan is on, and I don't know, like there's a Reagan like radio broadcast, and I don't know if that's supposed to just immerse you in the moment that you actually are in the real 80s somehow, even though this doesn't seem like a real place. I was sort of joking about trying to find a political angle on this. In some ways, I kind of can't. Other than that, what Panos likes to do is pull on the raw material, cultural raw material of different time periods and transform them into his image.
Yeah, I think that's definitely there. That's a good point, though. I totally just the radio clip, like you said, of Reagan. I was just like, oh, it's 80s. Like because I don't remember if there's like a title on screen that says like, hey, it's 1983. That's what the descriptions and the reviews that I read about it, all mention specifically it takes place in 1983. But yeah, that is like an interesting bit of the culture or to put into the beginning of a movie that's basically just feels otherworldly.
Right.
and not really set in a specific time period. Well, I think that some of the political angles we were already kind of talking about, meaning the Sand character, the cult leader, the remnants of, the 60s and 70s. This is now 83, so he's I don't know, let's use the Blue Sunshine kind of thing. Like 10 years earlier, like he was like hoping to be maybe a rock star. He's clearly like built up a following around him, that kind of Manson style, hoping to be a rock star. This guy's a psychedelic folk music. His hippie band that's still with him 10 years on are clearly under his influence to a dangerous degree. It's maybe like, what if Manson was like never put in jail? What if that type of personality was just out there and was allowed to flourish? And you got into the 80s with that kind of a personality?
And it's exactly the sort of, it's like up in, it's in California, but it's sort of the Pacific Northwest. It's like out in this very secluded area, right? And it's clear there's sort of like layers to this cult. So like the oldest members are sort of ex hippies or people who followed him early. But then there's sort of young, and it's a very small group, but like there's younger people who've been picked up along the way.
Right. This is also like their spot, though. This isn't like a passing through town.
Yeah. They're
kind of thing. So it's like within the general area. Yeah, it says Shadow Mountains are located in the Mojave Desert of Eastern California.
Okay, so I take it back. Except that's interesting. It's the Mojave. I want to look up images of this. I think.
Well, if you also think about it, I can't remember the name of the name of it off the top of my head now, but I read this book ages ago that was all about like cults, and it was one of my true crime phases. But it was all about like the occult and then cults specifically, and the whole thing was just about, a whole chapter in the thing was all about just like California cults of like that new agey kind of hippie era and like the long history of that stuff. There was like, Jesus Christ. And they list off all these ones. I was like, I would have been able to say like, oh yeah, like Manson was a thing or who knows what, but then how it evolves into like the self-help movement and into the, I don't know, whole mess of stuff nowadays. But all of these interesting kind of cults that were popping up in that time period, like, yeah, what if one just stuck around and actually made it for like 15, 20 years?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, probably, in the early 80s, it wouldn't be surprising if there were, right? Like,
yeah,
it's not that long after, right? It is the detritus of the 60s. I'm trying to figure, all right, so the Mojave Desert, I kept sort of placing it in this sort of Pacific Northwest zone, and maybe I'm wrong. Wow, my geography is really bad.
No, it's like closer to the edge of Nevada and Southern California.
Okay, wow, it's Southern California. Shit. All right, I take it all back. Scrub the podcast.
Yeah, so I mean, what are we talking about then? Kind of maybe even comparatively, this and Blue Sunshine, we've got clearly like we said, baked into the narrative in copious amounts. You've got LSD here working its, I guess we can say, magic for Cage as he was able to get revenge. But he's also clearly, I think, this is like, I watched The Love of My Life burned right in front of me. Like I'm on a suicide mission to make sure I take as many of you with me, kind of things. This isn't plans for after I finish this test thing. This is just like the moment at hand. I need to take these people out story. So different representation of LSD versus what's going on in Blue Sunshine, other than maybe like you could say some of the cult in Mandy or some of the folks that had Blue Sunshine 10 years earlier, but maybe just didn't trip that psychotic kill chromosome. I don't know.
I mean, it's I think in a certain sense, the one is meant to satirize as opposed to toxic effects of the 60s counterculture. And the other one is playing off the actual real existing toxic effects of the 60s counterculture, which are very real. And when I say counterculture, I don't mean the political movements, right? Hippies are not the 60s movement, like the 60s political movements. Hippies are broadly, you could say, connected to the anti-war movement in a sense.
I always thought of it more as a generational term almost too. I know there's like kind of a lifestyle that goes with it, but it's also like the way people refer to Gen X and they picture, like I was trying to say like, not nihilistic, but like, okay, they're into like grunge music. They don't care about anything. They just want to sit on the couch all day. It's a slacker generation. Like, well, that's there and it's part of it, but that isn't the whole of it. And also that isn't representative of any specific like activist or political group either.
It's not,
but they're around.
But it's an actual subculture, and it's one that continues to this day, right?
Yeah.
And part of it is, I mean, this could be unfair, but I don't think it's an accident that the anti-vax movement really starts with upper middle class people in California, not uneducated people, not whatever, but like upper middle class assholes
Yeah.
in California who are into woo-woo shit.
Well, the evolution of that cult mentality, like I was saying, it goes into a new age, goes into, I don't know, fucking everything from yoga to, like you said, anti-vax shit right now.
Right. I mean, yoga's great, but also,
that was probably an unfair thing to throw in, but like I just have that as in my head of like.
But your weird Eastern mystical fetishization of yoga.
Yes. Where you have to have your crystals just right on your windowsill to capture the sun, or otherwise your positions aren't going to yield the effect you want. That old story. But I guess actually in comparison, you do have people that are on LSD committing mass murder in both of these.
Yeah. Wow. It's just that LSD, it's just switch in the back of your head and you just turn into a murder machine, I guess.
Which, actually now makes the case study LSD film by Lockheed Martin seem like quaint, because all she does is stomp a hot dog on the ground and then run away screaming.
Hey, I mean, they really could. I feel like if you're going to do, I mean, it's not an anti-drug PSA exactly, but if you're going to do your anti-drug PSA, go big or go home.
Well, it does have the vibe. I think one comment I saw was like, this is your hot dog on drugs. And it was like, okay, that's a pretty good joke.
That is actually really, are you sure this is, what's the satire here?
Oh, in the Lockheed Martin one?
Yeah. I mean, is it
I don't think it's made as satire. Like, it's made as like, it's part of I can't remember the other names, but it's part of like a 4-film educational film package they produced. So like, they are not being satire. They're not being comedic at all. Like, it's a totally straight movie.
I mean, I think I would include Mandy in the art horror wave of the 2010s, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Oh, and it's also in my head, I remember like people saw that movie, loved that movie. In my head, that was like a cult hit, but it was made for $6 million, which is a very fairly small budget nowadays, and grossed like 1.5, I think it was 1.7. I wrote down. This was not really a financial hit. I just had this in my head as like this was one of those like cult hits that like was a cult hit when it came out.
It really wouldn't surprise me if it's made it back on streaming and other things. No, it really, well, remember, so at the movie theater that we worked at, right, it barely got released.
Oh, that's true. We had to really like kind of fight for it too, if I remember correctly, because like it was going to big markets and we're like, where Cleveland, like 9-round would be great. Let's get this in here.
Right. Well, I remember it showed once across town at the theater across town, I think. Mm-hmm. And then, yeah, you had to like convince them, or you and several others had to convince them, you can do this as a 9-round movie.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, they're fucking packed. Like what?
Right. Yeah, meaning like 9 p.m., like the late round of the day. Like the people were not coming out on like Tuesday afternoon at 2 p.m. to watch Mandy necessarily. But I guess maybe that's why it only made $1.5 million. Was it was showing once a day, and it was a good crowd. But
it wasn't given a chance. But no, I mean, look, there's a reason Shudder scooped it up, because for people in the know, this is a very big deal movie.
Yeah.
I think this is certainly one of my favorite movies of the 2010s. I think if you're looking for Hollywood, for Halloween, not Hollywood, Halloween watching, both of these would be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But Mandy, like, don't like have it on a party or something. Really watch it.
That'd be a very interesting party. I feel like it would get quiet fairly quickly.
Yes,
and maybe what you experienced in the theater when you saw it, where like it actually does turn everybody in the room and everybody just like, no, shut the fuck up, he's talking right now. We're watching this movie.
Or at the very least, when the cheddar monster shows up, and we didn't even talk about that.
True.
I think it's one. All right. So along with detritus of the 60s and along with LSD, the other sort of thing that I'll say about both of these is they have really good scenes portraying male entitlement to women's bodies. And you've got some good performances getting that across really well in both films.
I think so. Yeah. So that is our couple of films on bad trips. I feel like I wish we would have come up with a snappier name, but that's what that is. If you have any last minute recommendations, Isaac, for alternate titles, now's the time.
Oh shit.
On the spot.
Right on the spot.
I like Detritus of the 60s. I think that kept coming up, but these are specifically like, LSD through and through movies, and are also playing around within the horror genre kind of in different ways as well. Also from different time periods. So you're going to get different content allowed to be shown in both of these films because they're from the different time periods.
I mean, I think Detritus of the 60s is an ongoing theme of this podcast that
Yeah.
over and over and over again. Detritus of the 60s, bad trips. Or
Bad trips.
Detritus of the 60s, movies about how LSD may or may not always be a good idea all the time.
That's a really long podcast title, though. That might get cut off on a lot of players. But we do have a pithy triple alliteration for our next theme we're taking a look at as we continue our Halloween/October coverage. What do we got, Isaac?
Next episode, as we continue with the happiest time of year. The only holiday that deserves to have mission creep, unlike Christmas, which needs to back the fuck off back off from Thanksgiving and get right back, at least go back to your own month, okay? But Halloween can expand as much as it wants. In my heart, it's always Halloween. We're going to be covering humans hunting humans. Should we say what we're going to watch, though?
I think so.
We are covering 2 human hunting humans, one of the most respectable and venerated subgenres within horror. I might not be being totally serious there. We are watching Turkey Shoot from 1982. And we are watching a movie which I think both of us agreed we really needed to cover. I've been thinking about covering for the entire life of this podcast, Punishment Park from, I believe, 1971. And it's going to be fun. I'm really excited for humans hunting humans, right? It's a theme that I never really knew that I needed until you suggested it, and I'm really excited. I mean, hopefully, maybe we should tie a listicle of like other human hunting human movies onto this one, just to say like there's a lot of these you can watch.
There is. I did a list on Letterboxd real quick of like 24. I've done a pre-code cinema class before, and one of the ones I always use is Most Dangerous Game, 1932. One, because it's real quick. I mean, it is like, a tight like 60. I think it's like 62 minutes, and there's like nothing extra in that movie whatsoever, and it doesn't feel rushed either. But I was like, damn, that Most Dangerous Game, like that's going back to the 30s, and I was like, I remember as a kid in the 90s going to see what's the one with Ice-T, Surviving the Game.
Mm-hmm.
Not going to see it, but getting it from the video store. I was like, God damn, okay, Humans Hunting Humans has been around for a while, but also the nature of our show, I was like, these are always inherently political, because it's rare, if not never, a thing where I guess they fight back necessarily, but it's always like the wealthy are always hunting the poor. It's not ever the other way around.
I mean, if only. But well, you know what? Think about Hard Target, right? So, which is a human hunting human movie with Jean-Claude Van Damme, directed by John Woo. By John Woo himself. Fucking masterpiece of a movie. And my favorite line of that whole movie is Lance Henriksen, our evil hunting poor veterans guy, is like, why are you doing this? Because they weren't even hunting Van Damme. And he's like, well, poor people have to have fun too. Yeah.
And also, because of the two that we're looking at, Turkey Shoot and Punishment Park, both, which we'll get into next time, so stay tuned for that. They both have, I don't know, almost like exact opposite, or not exact opposite, they almost have like the exact same plot, just from 2 different countries and 2 different time periods. So we thought, how rare is that? We need to shuffle these 2 together and have a little discussion about that. But before we officially sign off, we always like to remind you folks to rate and review the show in whatever podcast app you are using. Also, look in whatever device you're playing this right now for the links to the different things that we mentioned throughout the show. Also, the social media stuff is in there as well. And until next time, when we are looking at humans hunting humans, I am Aaron.
And I'm Isaac. And stay safe out there, especially if you're in California. I realize, I don't know, I think the heat wave is crested or so forth, but like we have fires, we've had heat. Where I am, we don't even have air conditioning. So, stay safe in this particular part of the world. I've already talked about environmental disasters on like every episode for the last whatever, but like, specifically here, don't, drink water. Be safe.
That really just sounded like you said, don't drink water.
Well, don't. It's in the water. Do you understand? Don't do it.
Bye.